Now, a few weeks ago, I participated in a fun little week called Toon Sports Week with a few really talented fellow animation critics. And while working on my top 10 list for that week, I was reminded of this episode from King of the Hill. Now, I remember watching this when I was younger, and it not leaving too much of an impact on me. It just seemed like a typical, decent King of the Hill episode that was centered around a football record. But after analyzing it for the list, I decided there was a lot more I wanted to talk about with it, because I personally feel this episode goes a little deeper than just being a football episode. Now, at first glance, you really wouldn't think that. It's about Bill's high school football record for most career touchdowns, approaching being broken by a star player named Ricky Suggs. And Bill is initially happy by it, even cheering for Ricky when he ties it. But when Ricky gets a serious knee injury in the next game, he decides to still play anyway, with seemingly a little bit of a push from Peggy. And he ends up actually being handed the record. This doesn't sit well with Hank, who feels the act of handing a record to someone is poor sportsmanship, and that Ricky being hurt shouldn't be an excuse to hand him such a prestigious accomplishment. And Bill, who initially is in denial about his record being stolen from him, realizes what happened to him was unfair, sending him into a state of depression. But Hank finds out that because Bill never completed high school, as he had joined the military before graduating, he still has redshirt eligibility, and therefore can tie up the record again fair and square. Now, the first thing I want to get out of the way is this episode clearly predicted the future. Yeah, for the longest time, I thought this episode was inspired by the controversial way Michael Strahan broke Mark Gastineau's single-season sack record, but no, this episode came out 2 years prior to that, so clearly this episode predicted that event. In fact, there's more. This episode actually predicted 2 events. Yeah, Ricky Suggs tearing his ACL, yet still going out to play, actually happened in a real football game. In a 2007 AFC Championship game between the Chargers and Patriots, Chargers quarterback Phillip Rivers played the entire game with a torn ACL. They ended up losing that game, but hell, that was still something no one ever thought they'd see a player do that was portrayed in this episode, which aired almost a decade prior. Oh, looks like you got competition now. Okay, but seriously, there are a few things I want to discuss about this episode. And I think it'd be best to get the one thing I kind of have a problem with out of the way, which luckily is pretty minor. It's Peggy's involvement in this episode. I have no idea what purpose she has in this episode. First, it seems like she's the one who encourages Ricky to play with a torn ACL, which, seeing as this episode came out only 2 episodes after Peggy's skydiving accident, actually doesn't seem like a bad idea, because you could see her wanting to encourage people to fight the odds like she does in that episode.
Doctors say I'm out for the season.
Oh, please, what do doctors know? A doctor told me I might not walk again. Well, not only am I walking, I hear his marriage has gone south too.
Yeah, okay.
That's the attitude.
Yeah, when they go to the game to watch Ricky play with the torn ACL, she seems pretty against it because it might hurt Bill.
Why are you in such a hurry to witness Bill's soul-shattering collapse when Ricky Suggs crosses that goal line?
I mean, this probably could have played a big role in the debates that are to come later in this episode, with Peggy debating Hank on whether or not Ricky deserves this record. But she virtually disappears after this. And I'm not sure if her talk is what motivates Ricky to go out and play. It seems implied that it is, but the focus seems way too much on Ricky's involvement, and Peggy's talk with him never even gets brought up again, so why was it even necessary? But like I said, that complaint is very minor, because the rest of the episode seems so much more well put together. Now, after doing a list focused around 10 other football episodes, most of those episodes seem to focus on the actual sports. But there were also a few episodes on that list that dove a little deeper and used the sport more to keep a certain message relatable, with episodes like Bart Starr focusing on parental support, and She's Got Game focusing on the right ways to fight for gender equality. And in this episode, Football seems to be used to teach a lesson in why sports records should be respected, and how sports and competition are pretty vital in preparing people for the real world. Now let's talk about the importance of setting sports records, because this is shown when Hank ends up debating a few people about the legitimacy of Ricky Suggs' record, and he gets some pretty interesting responses about it.
Hank, facts are facts, and the fact is that boy would have blown the old record out of the water if he didn't get hurt.
Well, I don't know why you're so mad, Hank. If the fat, bald guy who had the record doesn't care, why should you?
Now this is a common thing you see among sports fans, where they'll make excuses for anything that violates the sanctity of the sport, so long as the person who's violating that sanctity is someone they root for. But the thing is, injuries don't actually matter when it comes to records. Here's the thing about records and accomplishments in general. They're designed to be earned. They're supposed to be a symbol of all the hard work you've put in. Now there's no denying Ricky has proven himself as a good football player, but as unfortunate as injuries are, in sports they have never been a reason to hand someone a record. Even when Hank talks to the coach about the record, the coach admits he doesn't view the record as real himself.
Are you asking me to slice another piece of phony baloney like they made me at last week's game?
Because the record was completely handed over, the record itself ended up becoming tarnished. And I think that's what sets Bill off. His record became meaningless. It wasn't earned competitively like it's supposed to be. And speaking of lack of competition, it's actually become a lot more common in sports nowadays than you would think. Now there's a running debate nowadays that the best thing about sports is competition, because life in general is a competitive game. So when you take the competition out of sports, it sets a bad example. That's actually a common complaint with tons of children's sports organizations abolishing winners and losers in an attempt to keep kids from feeling sad and not having fun. And the thing is, the fun shouldn't be in guaranteed success. It should be in giving it your all. Being able to fail, but hold your head up high because you know you gave it everything you got, and letting that failure motivate you to improve. And this episode kinda goes over that by insinuating that giving free handouts like this sets a bad example and makes kids less likely to want to improve.
9:52, 53. Hey, I'm setting a new world's record.
Well, that's real good, Bobby, but I think you have to start over when you fall off.
I'll be honest with you, Dad. I'm not in the best shape, and this is the only way I'm gonna make it.
Dang it, Bobby, that's not how you set a record.
Okay. One. Oh, forget it.
Now Ricky Suggs wanting to play despite an injury is definitely an incredible feat which alone could be seen as inspiring. But the fact that people thought it was worth handing him an accomplishment sends out a bad message about competition, and that's what life is all about. It's not something you should rely on going well if you catch a bad break. The biggest accomplishment you'll ever make in your life will be accomplishments you make while overcoming these bad breaks. You shouldn't focus on how unfair you think someone else's success is. You should be focusing on making your own success and making it in the right ways. Ways that you can actually be proud of. And that's exactly what Bill does. Not once during this entire episode does he complain about this in a grand way. While Hank is going around asking the school board to put an asterisk next to the record and complaining to all these people who support the screw job, Bill, instead, never actually complains to anyone. He instead tries to be happy for Ricky despite what happened, and when he does finally accept he was wronged, he's given a chance to right it despite the odds being heavily stacked against him, and he does it! He goes back in, middle-aged, and tears himself up trying to earn back the record that was stolen from him. And when he does tie it up, everyone appreciates his feat more than Ricky's, because what Bill did was more worthy of praise. And at the end, he delivers what I think is one of his strongest lines.
When Ricky tied my record, he did it fair and square. I am honored to share it with him. Oh, besides, I can't get up.
And he's right. Ricky definitely earned the right to share the record, and Bill would rather settle for righting a wrong than trying to add to what was already a well-fought-for victory, especially when it's clear that doing so is not exactly a realistic task. That's exactly how people should compete in their lives. They should compete to accomplish their goals, but set their goals in a realistic fashion. Whether it's competing for a promotion you know you can get, competing to be number one in your class when you know you're smart enough to do so, competing with yourself to improve your own self-esteem when you know you have the strength inside you to do so. Life is a series of challenges that need to be faced head-on. You need to push yourself to get better. You need to be willing to look at what you failed at and how you can improve it. And putting more effort into finding an easy route will only make everything harder on you in the long run. Now, in all honesty, do I think this is the message this episode was trying to send? Well, probably not. You very easily could argue that they were just trying to keep their arguments centered on how sports records should be earned, and I'm just overthinking all of this. But, that being said, that's what's fun about these forms of media. They usually keep everything vague enough to where you can draw your own conclusions, yet still don't go too vague to where it feels like there's no thought put into it. Some of the best shows do this consistently, and King of the Hill did it with almost every episode. It's definitely something I'm happy I finally talked about, and I know I'll be reviewing it more in the future. And as for this episode as a whole, it's, in my opinion, a great episode, no matter how you want to look at it. If you want to look at it as an episode that teaches you more about life, an episode about the sanctity of earning achievements fair and square, or, hell, just a good old-fashioned King of the Hill episode, I feel this is one that'll satisfy any of those viewings. And, who knows? It might even be one you'll call one of your favorites. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next review.